Do you remember the most shocking thing you ever heard the quiet kid say in class? It happened when he asked the teacher if he could use the bathroom. Without missing a beat, she snapped back. "You've got 2 minutes, Richard," and Richard, in his usual deadpan tone, says, 2 minutes takes me that long just to unravel it. The teacher's face turned bright red, and the entire class burst into laughter. We were in the middle of a boring elective class, and we'd run out of things to do. So, as a last resort, we decided to have story time. My friend stood up, walked to the front, and began telling us a crazy story. He shared how, one time, he had a pretty serious accident. He was walking to his friend's house, slipped on black ice, and face-planted hard enough that most of his front lip was torn off, along with some teeth. Bleeding and disoriented, he ran inside, babbling and barely making sense. He was only 11, after all, with part of his face missing. His friend's mom took one look at him and immediately ran into her bedroom, locked the door, and didn't do a thing until my friend's dad showed up. When he did, he started yelling at her. My friend still doesn't understand why this grown woman couldn't handle it better. Naturally, we all started joking around, throwing out ridiculous psychoanalysis guesses. And that's when the quiet kid, who rarely said anything, suddenly spoke up. He raised his head, and with the gravitas of a philosopher, said, "Maybe she just needed to finger herself real quick." The room went dead silent. Then there was this other time, when the quiet kid, who hardly ever spoke, asked the teacher for the time during some after-school activity. There wasn't a clock in the room, so the teacher, in her usual style, told him, "You should get a watch." For some reason, everyone else found it hilarious. But the quiet kid didn't laugh. He stared at the teacher, dead in the eyes, and after a long pause he said, "So, are you going to tell me the time or not?" So, we're sitting there in 7th grade, studying genetics, when this one kid just won't shut up. The teacher's losing patience, trying to get him to be quiet. Then, after a discussion about inbreeding in dogs, the quiet kid raises his hand and asks, "Is this how Peter became so stupid?" The kid who was always causing trouble was standing in with the quiet kid and his friend. The quiet kid, who was a bit on the heavier side, got to the front of the lunch line to grab his chicken nuggets. The jerk looks at him and says, "You sure you don't want extra nuggets, big guy?" Without skipping a beat, the quiet kid just starts going oath. He says, "Nah, I'm good. But hey, what are you doing this weekend? Want to hang out, grab some food, maybe get a little crazy? I like to be on top, and you look like a bottom. What do you think? You down to get screwed tonight?" The entire lunch line went like. The jerk, clearly stunned, got all riled up, and acted like he was about to start a fight. The quiet kid, though, coolly responded, "Okay, fine, you can be on top, baby." At that, the jerk stormed off and the whole line erupted in laughter. I still don't know if the quiet kid was actually gay, or just knew that teasing the jerk about it would mess with him more than anything. But I do know this. The quiet kid left the line with his chicken nuggets and a huge grin on his face. I once worked a quiet guy who hardly said anything, but one day, he asked me, "What happens when an Eskimo gets pleasured?" Before I could respond, he threw a handful of ice at me and walked off. Back in junior high, in the mid-80s, Trivial Pursuit is all the rage. We played it in math class one day, and there was this kid, Gary, who never said much, but when it came to the sports trivia questions, he was a machine. He nailed every single one, and totally crushed the rest of us. He got a ton of attention after that, and I swear he walked a little taller from that point on. But after that day, I don't think I ever heard him say another word. However, I did see him sitting on the bleachers at a few FERTS events, watching from the sideline. One day, the quiet kid in my class stood up, grabbed a broom, climbed onto a chair. We were all watching in confusion as he tried to swat at a bee that had flown inside. The bee landed on the window, and in his usual deadpan manner, he yelled, "I beat it," as he swung the broom and shattered the window. The whole class just froze. And then, after the loud crash, he sat back down, as if nothing happened. He never spoke again after that. Then, there was this one student of mine. She never said a word all year long, until one day, I was trying to control a noisy group, and out of nowhere, she screamed, "Shut the heck up. I'm trying to work, you freaking jerks." The entire class went dead silent. I didn't know how to react, especially since she was normally the quiet, studious one. It was just so unexpected.
I can relate to that feeling.
In middle school, I wasn't exactly quiet, but I didn't really socialize much, except with the people right next to me. I'd ask for a pencil or something like that. But there was this one day when the class jerk went a little too far. and I snapped. I stood up, yelled at him, and then sat back down. The entire class went silent after that, but he never acted that jerky again. I used to be best friends with the quiet kid in middle school. He wasn't shocking, but he did say something that left me speechless once. He got this far-off look in his eyes, and then he said, "I can't remember what color my dog is. My dad's really quiet. So quiet, in fact, that it makes most people uncomfortable, even me sometimes." One day, while we were at the park, a woman walked by, and my dad suddenly said, "What if I punch that woman in the face and say, 'Sorry, I thought you were my wife'?"
In high school,
There was this girl named Grace. She was really nice, but she barely spoke. At prom, I was in the parking lot, running to my car to grab my glasses after losing a contact. Grace was walking by, smiling, and then out of nowhere she said, "My prom date just pleasured the heck out of me." I still laugh about it to this day. I remember a guy from my class who once got so mad that he tried to attack someone with a table. It was right when the teacher left to grab a cup of coffee. It was one of the wildest things I've ever seen. I was in marching band in high school, about 7 years ago, when we had this big muscular guy as our brass instructor. He was always shouting at us to play louder or nail the chords. One really hot afternoon, he yelled, "Why don't the trumpets blow hard enough?" Then from the quietest kid in the trumpet section, we hear, "Isn't your mom blow me hard enough?" The whole band lost it, but we all got push-ups for it, and laughed even harder. This question couldn't have come at a better time. I was just thinking about this incident from sophomore year. There was this kid who no one really noticed, but one day, he was sitting across from me at lunch, and he saw a girl in really tight shorts. He looks at her and says, "Man, I could have my head up her butt for months." It was pretty shocking. One time, I was with a guy named Daniel in high school. He never said a word. A friend of mine said he'd sometimes whisper, but that was it. At our senior party, we had a karaoke machine. Everyone had sung by that point, but no one had really noticed Daniel. Then suddenly the music stopped, and the DJ restarted the song. Daniel stood up, and to everyone's surprise, he started singing. He wasn't the best singer, but the fact that no one had ever heard him speak made the whole room stop what they were doing. When the song ended, the room erupted in applause. Daniel walked away with a big smile on his face. It was such a sweet moment. I was like that story. No matter what, there are always people who will support you. He was completely silent, but he was nice enough and played with us like everyone else. One day, while we were looking out the classroom window, a cop car drove by, and suddenly Donatel spoke up saying, "I'm going to be a cop one day." At the time, we were all excited to hear him speak, but looking back, I realized Donatel probably had some serious history that made him keep quiet. In high school, I had this kid in my first-level Spanish class who was incredibly quiet. At the end of the year, we all had to give speeches in front of the class. When it was his turn, he didn't speak in Spanish, but instead, he gave his entire speech in a language he had invented over the course of the year. It was why I remember a time when the seniors multi locker pinball with the underclassmen. It's exactly what it sounds like. They'd bounce a smaller kid from locker to locker. One day, they were doing this to a kid, and he asked them to stop because it was hurting him. But they just bounced him hard. That was apparently his breaking point. He launched himself at the nearest senior in ear, our star basketball player, and bit into his neck, tearing off a piece of skin. The senior just stood there, holding his bloody shirt, growling. After that, no one ever messed with Mad Dog Mike again. There was this guy, Jeremy, who was so silent that we all thought he was a mute. One day, our school had painted the bins in all these crazy designs. As we walked by, Jeremy just pointed to one of them and said, "That's a weird design." It was the first time I'd ever heard him speak. One day, we were walking past a bin that was covered in prints. The quiet kid casually says, "That bin is handy." We were all left completely stunned by his pun. It was one of those moments when you just don't know whether laugh or not. I remember back in 5th grade, my friend did a PowerPoint presentation about Eminem. He shared how he grew up in a trailer park, and right after he finished, the quiet straight-A student stood up and casually said, "Just like you," before asking to go to the bathroom. No one really understood what had just happened. We were living in Northern Europe, so it's not like trailers were common here, and my friend definitely didn't live in one. If anything, I think the quiet kid was just looking for an excuse to make a random comment. This next story takes a much more serious turn, so just a heads up. I once took a class with Shung Hu Cho, the Virginia Tech shooter, one semester before the tragedy. It was a class called Contemporary Horror, an elective that was offered only once by my favorite professor. We read horror novels, watched horror films, and analyzed how they reflected the fears of the times. It was an amazing class, and there were only about 15 of us, so it was discussion heavy. Cho was in that class, but honestly, I never really noticed him. He wasn't quiet. He was completely silent. The moment we all actually noticed him was during one of the class discussions. Our professor asked him a question, and Cho just stared at him. I don't remember the exact question, but the silence felt uncomfortable. Everyone else chuckled at the awkwardness, but Cho didn't flinch. He just kept staring at the professor. After a few moments of silence, our professor finally said okay and moved on. It was such a strange moment, and I forgot about it until after the shooting. Later, my professor told me that Cho's papers had been disturbing, but the nature of our course meant we were pushing boundaries a bit, so it wasn't alarming enough at the time to suggest something terrible was coming. Still, the professor admitted he felt guilty, wondering if he could have done something differently to identify Cho's struggles. It was heartbreaking. On a lighter note, there was a quiet girl in my class who never said much. This was in 3rd or 4th grade. I always tried to be nice to her, like when she didn't have paper in her binder. I'd notice and give her some, or if she was searching for a pencil, I'd give her one I had. Small things, really, like picking up a pencil if she dropped it. Then one day, at lunch, a kid started picking on me. I was small, weak, and easily upset back then. Out of nowhere, the quiet girl stood up and said, "I'll give you 3 seconds to walk away." I was stunned. Those were the first words I'd ever heard her say. The bully slapped me, and before I could process what was happening, the quiet girl kicked him right in the balls. After that, I was honored and shocked that she had said anything at all. She never said another word after that, but I texted my friend and told her about it. Later, I found out that the quiet girl had moved shortly after I did. I tried calling her number, but it turned out the line was disconnected. It's been a long time now, but I still haven't been able to track her down. I don't even know her last name. I tried searching for her on Facebook by her first name, but nothing came up. I even asked some mutual friends if they knew where she lived, but no one had any answers. I'm not giving up though. I reached out to her mom, and her mom remembered me. She said her daughter is in a situation that prevents her from talking to anyone or going anywhere for a while. I still don't know exactly what's going on, but it's frustrating. I'll keep trying though. If I ever do talk to her again, I'll update you all. In the meantime, I've learned some things. For example, I found out how tall she is now, and I even got to see a picture of her once when we spoke. Her mother has had some trouble with the law, and her dad's situation is unclear. But my hope is that one day, when she turns 18, I'll finally be able to reconnect with her. So if you could send some positive energy my way, I'd appreciate it. As a quiet guy myself, I can relate to a lot of this. People are always talking about me, saying things like, "That guy never talks," to which I always reply, "No, I hear everything." They usually just laugh, but it's true. You don't have to speak to be aware of everything going on around you. It's funny how, even though I'm not a talkative person, my lack of conversation ends up being the topic of course in itself. The quiet kid in our group was Tommy. Tommy never said much. Out of all the lunches we spent together in senior year, I think Tommy was the only one who never told a story or joined in the conversation. He just sat quietly in his spot along the wall, eating his lunch, and occasionally laughing at our jokes. One day we were in the cafeteria, just like every other day, sharing stories. My friend Raymond had spent the night with a girl named Haley, who was 2 years younger, but already had a reputation for hooking up with a lot of different guys. Raymond was bragging about everything that happened, even though none of us were really impressed, knowing about Haley's reputation. After finishing his story, Raymond pulled out a sandwich. I think it was some kind of fish. It didn't look very appetizing, and Raymond said, "This looks disgusting, but I'll try it anyway." Then, out of nowhere, Tommy said, "Is that what you said about Haley last night?" The entire cafeteria exploded with laughter. Raymond froze mid-bite, stunned. I was doubled over in pain from laughing so hard. Some people were on the floor laughing, and one guy had to run to the bathroom because he thought he was going to throw up from laughing. Even Raymond had to laugh. I'd never seen Tommy smile, but that day, he had this sly grin on his face for the rest of the lunch hour. I've always been a bit of a geek, and I got bullied a lot in school. When the Columbine massacre happened in 8th grade, everyone started to think a little more about the consequences of bullying. The quiet kids. I thought that maybe things were starting to improve when high school rolled around, and people seemed to be less cliquey. Some of the popular kids even started being nice to me. But one day, one of them asked me, "If you brought a gun to school and shot everyone, would you kill me too?" That's when I realized that all the kindness I had been getting wasn't from a genuine place. It was out of fear. I was deeply insulted, and it hurt even more to realize that they didn't actually like me. They were just scared of me. There was another kid in my class named Pat, who was also a quiet nerd. He was pale, wore glasses, and hardly said a word. I thought we could be allies, so I started sitting next to him in an SET prep class. For a while he didn't say anything to me or anyone, but then, one day during class, a popular girl who wasn't exactly known for being smart said to him, "I used to think you were going to come to school and shoot everyone. But now I know I was wrong." Pat looked down at his desk, stroked his chin thoughtfully, and said, "We'll see." That was it. Pat and I became close friends, and we still keep in touch today. I also have this funny story from a trip I took to Prague. We were hanging out in a bar when someone passed around a joint with hash oil and tobacco. The quiet kid hit it and immediately got even quieter. About 20 minutes later, some aggressive black metal started playing, and out of nowhere, he yelled, "Kill your powers." We lost it. He was pretty happy with himself after that. I remember this one guy in my economics class who turned around and asked me what I thought he'd be when he grew up. He was always joking around, so I said, "Definitely a porn star." The girl sitting next to me started laughing hysterically, and even when class started she couldn't stop. The teacher came over and asked what was so funny. When the girl calmed down enough to answer, she said, "He said Daniel's gonna be a porn star." The entire class stared at me, and I turned bright red realizing what I had said. I had no excuse for it, and that's why I don't talk much. I had a similar experience in English class when I was sitting next to a football player. He wasn't known for being very bright, but he had a good sense of humor. He was shocked when he got an A on a test. I jokingly said, "What? Did you screw Mrs. Brown?" And everyone started laughing. But then, Stephanie, the tattling kid in front of me, told Mrs. Brown exactly what I said. Next thing I knew, I was in the hall with my English teacher, who was in her 50s, asking, "Why would such a nice boy like you say something like that?" I once heard about a kid who was in an announcing techniques class for radio and television. They were filming how-to videos when the kid showed up with a metal box. He pulled out a bunch of knives and filmed himself demonstrating the best ways to use them in combat, even using his friend as a dummy. His movements were erratic and intense, but his friend didn't even bat an eye. Despite how uncomfortable it made everyone, the professor had to give him an A because his presentation was actually well put together. One of my friends told me about a quiet girl who sneezed in class. Someone behind her said, "God bless you," and she simply responded, "God isn't real." There was also this guy in our fraternity who was usually pretty shy with girls. But one night, when asked what kind of girl he liked, he gaily said, "The kind of girl who loves to be crushed." I'm not sure if he ever crushed anyone, but that line became a staple in our frat for a while. In high school, there was this awkward quiet girl who always wore a giant coat and looked like a mess. She had a pretty sister who was popular and skinny, so people didn't think much of her. But one day, he got up at the school talent show, and when she sat down at the piano and started to play, we all went silent. She sang this hauntingly beautiful blues song that no one had ever heard before. I distinctly remember tearing up, and to this day, I still think about that moment. In middle school, the quiet kid Steven had an ongoing rivalry with a kid named Robbie. Robbie always got the better of him in their little arguments, mostly because Steven was too shy to fight back. One day, after class, I was walking behind Robbie when Steven silently crept up behind him. Before Robbie could turn around, Steven got as close as possible and said, "If I were to come into your house and kill you while you were sleeping, I doubt anyone would even notice." And with that, he vanished into the hallway. Robbie never bothered Steven again. Finally, there was a quiet kid in my class who hardly ever said anything, but one wed, we were watching Little Shop of Horrors in theater class. During a scene with tentacles or vines, this kid suddenly blurted out, "Well, I've seen enough hentai to know where this is going."